Angie, do you want to give us our little icebreaker? Are
Yeah.
we? Yeah. Okay, let's do that. And
So we are using a little bit of new technology around VFN, and we're super excited. We used it a little bit at the conference if you guys were at the conference, but it's an app called Slido. And so we're gonna put up a link real quick, and you all can follow the directions and the link there. And I'm gonna be sharing some of your responses.
that's hard to believe. We don't have anybody with saying the same thing. Everybody is so original. Oh, okay. Ideas is coming up.
Not to put any pressure on Michael and Ira today.
Yeah. Really learning ideas. Got your work cut out for you. Awesome. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, we're not going to waste any more time then, and we're going to, just make sure we have enough ample opportunity for them to talk and for you all to ask questions. So I'm Patty Koval. I'm the director of member networking and learning, and Angie Molina is here with us also from VFN, and she is our member services expert, as many of you all have already had opportunities to work with her. So we are going to turn it over to Susan Hallett and Caroline Nowry, who you all know as the co-chairs of the Housing Funders Networking Group, and they're going to tell you a little bit more about our plans for today and introduce you to our two panelists. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, Patty. Hi, everybody. I am Susan Hallett. I am Director of Philanthropy for the Bob and Annalise Shaberg Foundation, and we really appreciate you all joining us today. We know that this is going to be an incredibly informative and rich discussion. Caroline and I both had the opportunity to participate on a steering committee for a market value analysis that was done here in the Richmond region. It was actually an update of a market value analysis that was done here in the Richmond region that really gave us some amazing insight into housing trends in our community and utilizing those trends to inform for us as funders some of our philanthropic decisions. And it was a valuable experience for us, and we wanted to be able to bring it to our larger networking group and share a little bit about what was done in Richmond, but also what has been done in other communities that could be beneficial for all of you. So our two panelists today are Ira Goldstein and Michael Smith, and we're so grateful for their time and energy in joining us today. Ira is President of Policy Solutions at Reinvestment Fund. Ira has conducted spatial and statistical analysis in communities across the US. Those studies are used by government and philanthropy to craft policy and allocate public and philanthropic resources. He also has conducted studies of mortgage foreclosures and abusive lending practices. Ira created the Reinvestment Fund's market value analysis, which we're going to be learning about today. And before coming to the Reinvestment Fund, Ira served as the Mid-Atlantic Director of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at HUD. And Michael Smith, who I know many of you know, is Program and Strategy Officer at Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. In this role, Michael co-leads the foundation's General Operating Support Grant-Making Program. His duties include the implementation and evaluation of the foundation's strategies and outcomes, building and maintaining relationships with organizations and networks to assess the social, economic, and political context of their work, and nurturing relationships with philanthropic and mission-aligned partners. Prior to joining RMHF, Michael led real estate development and urban planning work in the nonprofit, government, and private sectors in Pittsburgh, PA. So we're really thrilled to have Michael and Ira with us today to talk through the market value analysis.
So as Susan mentioned, my name is Michael Smith. It's good to see you all virtually. I know I haven't seen a lot of you in person lately, but good to catch up today and give you some insight into some work that Ira and I have been doing for the past few months with the support of folks like Susan and Caroline and others of you on the call on our steering committee. So where do I begin? Where did RMHF find itself in supporting the market value analysis? I'm going to upload a document in a bit that gives a nice overview of how we got to supporting the MVA. But before I do that, I just wanted to share with you that many of you are familiar with RMHF and you understand the journey that we've been on as a health foundation entering into supporting the social determinants of health. And so that began in earnest by our trustees, gosh, I want to say about 8 years ago now. And that journey took many iterative steps. And critical to those steps was the allocation of data and resources to further understand, what the social determinants of health were, how are they showing up in our region, our service area in the Richmond region, and what could we as a foundation do to support interventions and support organizations working on the ground and in the front lines, trying to heal communities and heal people. And so the first engagement that we had with the market value analysis in 2017 was as a result of some engagement with Invest Health. And funny enough, I'm currently in Rhode Island at Invest Health convening. So the through line is very clear today with our relationship with Invest Health. Invest Health also is an initiative of the Reinvestment Fund. So this is all circular here in this universe of investing to support health and well-being for people. But we received the Invest Health Award in 2017, we meaning the Richmond region, but RMHF served as the fiscal sponsor on behalf of that initiative. And how we utilized those resources was investing in a market value analysis to further understand what our conditions in the built environment looked like. What could we as a foundation and other partners do in response to these findings? That led to more of a series of engagements that the foundation was involved in around the intersection of health and community investment. And all of that further put the foundation in relationship with partners in the region that we had not historically been in partnership with, that were doing housing development work, housing policy work, and the full wraparound services support for families that live in affordable housing. So I'm going to share my screen to kind of bring you up to speed to kind of how we got the update to the 2017 MVA started. So hopefully this goes well. Let's see. Do you all see a document? Okay, you do. Okay, great. So I like to share this document because this is the document that we shared with the members of the steering committee for our 2021 MVA update. And as Susan noted, she was a member of the steering committee along with Caroline and along with some of you on the call, I'm sure, from the Community Foundation. We also had participants from the public sector, private sector, as well as our nonprofit sector. And I'll get into what our approach was to seating the steering committee in this specific way. So this was kind of like our guiding document. This was how we showed up every meeting. This is what kind of grounded us in our work. And it continuously provided people on the steering committee and the folks that they engaged with leaving the meetings an understanding of what we were trying to achieve. So something that we really prioritized early on in this effort was repetition of information. The more we repeated why we were here, what brought us here, and what we were trying to achieve, the more it would get baked into the everyday dialogue, or so we hoped, of the members of the steering committee and the networks that they engaged with. That was something that we really wanted to prioritize because we didn't want this effort to end its work after a series of months and not continue towards implementation. We really wanted to ensure that the findings that were revealed out of this MVA were understood and also understood in the sense of where people could plug in their respective capacity. So this is what this document ultimately sought to achieve. This has provided everybody a background. And so I'm going to kind of give you all kind of an overview of what was discussed here. in 2021, early 2021, the city of Richmond approached us, the foundation said, hey, we know that you all supported the 2017 MVA. What would it look like for you all to be involved in supporting an update? It was part of the Richmond 300 implementation plan. And so we saw alignment with existing initiatives such as Richmond 300 to actually have a dialogue internally around, could we put some resources together to support an update? We at the foundation, as you all know, have been in the trenches of responding to COVID. And even before COVID, we knew that Richmond was experiencing extreme housing instability, particularly with evictions. And so from between 2017 to now, the Richmond region had rapidly changed. And so we knew that it was timely to bring this effort back to the table. So we began in earnest in talking to our team and our trustees. And as you all know, at RMHF, we are truly a trustee-driven foundation. So we wanted to make sure that we had ongoing dialogue with members of our board at the program and committee level, and also at the full board, for them to understand what was being asked of us and if we saw an opportunity to support this. So beginning in early 2021, RMHF, Plan RVA, and Reinvestment Fund in the city of Richmond began meeting as a core management team. We knew we needed to have Plan RVA on board, given that they have such a reach as our regional planning agency. And in fact, they became a co-funder in this effort, which was really strong. We knew we wanted to have partners on board with us in a real way that we could share with our board that, hey, we're not going at this alone. These are key partners that we have been in relationship for years that are also engaged in this effort. And so when we took it to our board in May of 2021, these are the goals that they charged us to consider as we went through this work. Centering the lived experiences of Black and Brown communities. As I mentioned, we knew over the past few years, many of our most impacted communities in the region as it relates to housing instability and economic instability were Black and Brown. And we already knew from the data that the foundation had been investing in years past that they were neighborhoods that were experiencing high asthmatic rates. They were neighborhoods that were experiencing low life expectancy rates. And so the compounding data that we had already collected was revealing that we needed to center these communities. And I'll talk a bit about how we sought to do that with the structuring of our steering committee. Being a tool for leadership development, particularly for younger, diverse leaders who would carry the mantle for housing equity and justice over the next 10 years. So we knew that there were many voices that exist in the housing and community development space that don't get often invited to tables like this. And so we wanted to make sure there was space, because we knew that in order for this work to carry forward long-term, we need to start investing in the folks that are going to be doing the work from years to come. And so we knew that this would be a great opportunity to bring in younger, new voices that don't often have their opinion asked at a table such as these. Connected to RMHS policy and advocacy goals, as articulated by the 2017 Equity and Health Fellows. So the 2017 Equity and Health Fellowship, some of you all are familiar with it. I'm not sure if any of you in the call were actually part of the fellowship, but that was a pretty significant and pivotal experience for the foundation. And it really charged us to get deeper into the policy and advocacy space. And so we knew that by investing in this opportunity to get real-time, quantitative and qualitative data, that would further help us in our understanding as a foundation on policy solutions that could meet the needs that we saw today. And we also knew that by investing in a tool like this, it would provide our partners who are in this space directly of policy and advocacy, a resource for them to further support their work as they go and seek change, structural and systemic change. And aligning with our nascent investments in organizing. So we, at the foundation have understood over some years and continue to understand in our journey of being an organization with a mission of achieving health and racial equity, that community engagement and community organizing is critical. And so we wanted to understand how that work was happening on the ground today. And could we find that out through the engagement of the steering committee members, what that looked like for them in response to COVID and in recovery from COVID, so that we could better understand what networks we could tap into when this tool was completed, so that they could be engaged upon with this effort. I'm trying to look at time too, so I want to be cognizant of that as well. The objectives of the process. So I should go back and say the core team that I mentioned before, RMHF, Plan RVA, the City of Richmond, and the Reinvestment Fund, we spent weeks, at least 3 months, meeting to get this document developed. So I need to actually emphasize that. That was so important because not only did we come together as a core team to put this document together, but we also did the work of understanding where we showed up for each other, right? So that we could actually make sure that before we even brought others to this effort, that we had a sense of trust amongst ourselves. And that process was facilitated by the wonderful Maria Zimmerman. And she really held us really tight to ensuring that we as a core team remained together. Because if we were able to be unified in our messaging and our approach to this work, that would show confidence to the steering committee members that this was an effort that they felt they could actually be of value to and provide voice to. So what were our objectives of this update? Why are we updating this 2017 MVA and how's it going to be different? So we wanted to gain clarity in the regions, the post-pandemic housing conditions in our region and our market trends over the last 4 years. Ira might touch on this, but the market value analysis is most impactful when you can compare two market value analysis to each other, right? So what changed from 2017 to now? Why were there changes? Who was involved in those changes? Should those changes be further invested in? Should they not? Those are questions we wanted to have within the steering committee. Develop an inventory of neighborhood-based support networks. So who are these institutions and anchors and informal leaders that are holding tight these neighborhoods through these very unstable times, right? With volatile housing conditions and volatile market conditions overall, who are these institutions that we need to be in relationship with to further understand what practices they did well and what practices we should know as a foundation as we continue understanding where this intersection of better health and in community investment is showing up. Identify recommendations for neighborhood-based wealth bidding structures. We didn't actually get to this in the MVA process, and I'll explain a bit why. We had aspirations to have recommendations at the conclusion of this work, but in the process of engaging the steering committee members, we knew that might be a little too ambitious and a little less respectful of people in neighborhoods. Because if we are a steering committee putting forth recommendations, what does that say about our approach to community engagement? So we really took a step back from that and said, okay, maybe when we go through implementation of this tool, this MVA tool, then we'll have an idea from the people on the ground what recommendations they have. Provide insight and data to inform investments across scales and funders. So this is our bread and butter as a Virginia Funders Network, right? What can this tool help for us as we think about the various funding mechanisms that we all are involved in to support housing stability and overall neighborhood stability? So how could this tool be of support to that? And hopefully this conversation is the beginning of that. To promote sustained engagement on housing data and land use decision making. Again, we at the foundation, we really believe in being proximate to communities, being proximate to organizations and individuals that are doing the work day to day. And so we hope that this steering committee process, this update process, could be a nice vehicle and venue to have that system of engagement. And I'll talk a little bit on further in this dialogue around how we seek to do that during our implementation of this tool. And we wanted to align with ongoing initiatives and studies. So we know that there's been a lot of work that's going on in the region to address our current housing and market conditions, right? I mentioned earlier the Richmond 300 comprehensive plan, how we wanted to remain aligned to that by supporting implementation of an update to the MVA. We at the foundation, as some of you all, supported the Richmond Regional Housing Framework that PHA commissioned. So we wanted to be in alignment to that. And we also knew there were other efforts that you all are a part of and others that we didn't want to overlook, and we wanted to actually be enfolded into this effort. And so that's also what our objectives were. And these objectives, as I said, came together in dialogue with the core team, and then we actually affirmed these at our kickoff meeting with the steering committee. We wanted to make sure all of these points were in accord with where they thought this process should go. Outcomes of the MBA update process. So we wanted a shared resident informed, data-driven tool to support targeted and transparent public and private investments. Emphasis on public, right? So we wanted to make sure that our public sector agencies understood their role in this. A narrative highlighting the questions raised during the update process regarding the needs, opportunities, and gaps within our system of community development. We're continuing to do that work. We did that work a little bit. Ira helped commission a piece that is on our website, on the RMHF website, where we talked about the loss of homes priced at $250,000. So the loss of first-time home buying price points, right, in our region. And we also have more questions that were revealed from the findings that I'll let Ira speak to it in a bit. And a pathway towards sustained collaboration to realize equitable development. Well, what is equitable development? We all have different interpretations of it. And how do we use this venue and this update process to continue the dialogue around what equitable development actually can look like and means in the Richmond region? So these were the desired outcomes. We walked through these outcomes actually at our last meeting with the steering committee, because we wanted to make sure, did we meet what we said we were going to meet? And we actually did. So that was a really, really great moment, to see that we had committed to these outcomes and that we were actually meeting them and continuing to meet them. What were our values and principles? So we need to have a sense of principles that allows us to show up in the right way every meeting during this steering committee. So intersection of health and housing, as you know, RMHF, that is what we prioritize. So we continue to understand what actually is happening with the individual and community-wide health as it relates to investments in affordable housing and actually not investing in affordable housing, right? So what is happening to health? Asset-based engagement, we wanted to not look at the findings in our community from a deficit. Obviously, a lot of things that were revealed are not that great, but there are aspects to our neighborhoods and our region that need to be uplifted. And we wanted to make sure that was always put forth and front and center. What are the assets in this neighborhood that can help respond to these unfortunate findings that we're seeing in this market value analysis? Co-design. So we wanted to ensure at every step, this process was co-designed with the members of the steering committee. So as I've mentioned, we made sure this document was thoroughly walked through at the kickoff meeting, and other aspects of the update were engaged with the members of the steering committee at every process, so they understood they were leading this and not being kind of reacting to it. Democratization of data. So we want to make sure that this tool is actually understood and owned by community organizations and people in neighborhoods. So we really wanted to ensure that we had resources set aside on the back end so that this tool could be implemented in a way that made it actually owned and operationalized with members of our community, that it wasn't just something that RMHF invested in and Plan RVA invested in and it never went anywhere. We wanted to make sure that it's democratized across our region. And leadership development, we wanted to make sure that folks that not historically been a part of initiatives like this feel that they were real contributors and that they can take this and move into it within their respective organizations and networks at the conclusion. So these were the roles and responsibilities. So I'm telling you, this was very exhaustive. We really wanted to make sure that we were allowing the steering committee members to know what they had to show up and do. And so we structured our meetings, our steering committee meetings, around these bullets. So we had 4 steering committee meetings. I should refer back to my timeline. I think we had 5, excuse me. We had 5. Did I just switch pages on you all? I forgot that I was sharing my screen. I'm sorry. We had 5 steering committee meetings, and each steering committee meeting focused on these bullets. So at the end of our process, we knew that we could walk through each of these bullets and people could remember where we touched on this and at what meeting. So we affirmed and informed the values and principles that were noted above. we were affirmed of the desired outcomes of this update process. We got local housing data. The members of the steering committee were able to contribute in response to the local housing data about what they saw on the ground day to day, just living here. They were able to advise on whether the data was actually what they saw. And we were able to validate the models that the Reinvestment Fund put forward. Then we had many conversations around recommendations for further study. And again, that recommendations for strategic implementation, we did get there. So that's different than the recommendations for actual wealth building solutions. These are recommendations for how do we implement this long-term and where should it go? And we're still in the process of really nailing down that. Identify opportunities for long-term engagement. That's another process that's ongoing. And support dissemination to the community partners. We'll be doing that in partnership with Plan RVA as they're the lead implementation agency, and they'll be doing that virtually, digitally, I would say, via website. And then we're also going to be doing a series of community engagement meetings. And I should say, in addition to all of these aspects of the steering committee, all of these aspects of the update process getting met, they were met at the steering committee level, which was kind of our bigger, higher level meetings, the 5 that we had. And then we also had subcommittees. And we had subcommittees that were focused on resident engagement and data validation, right? So how is the data being validated, and is it being validated by what you are seeing on the ground as folks engaging communities? And then we had a subcommittee on strategic investment. So where can we start to think about how this tool can inform our investment priorities and strategies from both public and private and philanthropic perspectives. So that is a 30-minute, exhaustive overview of this process. I really wanted to give this really the time I think that it deserved, because just the partners that we were able to have were so wonderful in the Reinvestment Fund, Plan RVA, the City of Richmond, and everyone on the steering committee. This began in October of 2021 and ended May 1st. So we tried to be as really short and deliberate with our timeline, and I think we accomplished that. So I will stop talking and stop sharing my screen, and I'll pass it along to you, Ira, to go a little bit further.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Hopefully I get this right. And I'm wondering, because I can't quite tell, if you all are seeing an actual PowerPoint presentation or like the presenter's view.
We're looking at the presenter's view.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I'll get.
No, you're fine.
Let's go with this then. Are you now seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes. Yep.
Terrific, thanks. I always get things right the second time. Thank you all. And I appreciate very much the way Michael laid out for you the thoughtful and engaged process that the foundation really sort of fostered in the actually many months leading up to the creation of the MBA, as well as during the MBA process itself. At the end of the day, among all the other things that process does that Michael articulated in terms of leadership development and giving voice to people who don't necessarily always have voice in decisions, and some of the other imperatives that the foundation brought to it, as sort of an analyst in this kind of work, what I find, and Richmond, I think, was probably the best example of this, is that, these engagement processes really ensure that at the end of the day, what you've created for that community is both accurate, which is baseline, and actionable. And, I think that you all are sort of in a field where being able to sort of affect change is important. So having tools that, position you to do that, I think, is critically important. So having said that, what I'm going to do now is for a few minutes, walk you through what the MBA is. And then time permitting, I'm going to try and actually highlight a couple of issues that really sort of spun out of this MBA analysis that were really, I think, surfaced by the stakeholders. in very large measure. And, led to some really important discussions about what you can do about these issues. But I would also like to say that this is a piece of work that we did in the Richmond area. And when I say the Richmond area, it is the city of Richmond, it is Henrico and Chesterfield counties. We don't have these for all over the Commonwealth of Virginia. But I don't think that means that you all in your communities are unable to, to use some of the data and principles that we use in creating the MVA to have data tools to make data informed decisions. And so what I would like to do is offer this as, one example of the ways that communities are able to sort of work with us to do this. But, as I said, there are other approaches, and there's, in 2022, there's way more data out there than there was in 2000 when we started this work, and way more data than in the 1970s when I started the work personally. So, we're in a much better place now, and I feel like we can all, yourselves included, can benefit from it. So quickly, the MVA is something that we crafted in the city of Philadelphia in the year 2000, and it really was the data-based framework that was the underpinning of a near $300 million worth of investments that a former Mayor John Street, endeavored to effectuate in the city of Philadelphia, essentially to try and bring forth the vitality of the city's downtown, which had been revitalized under his predecessor, up into the neighborhoods, which had continued to languish while the downtown was getting fancy. And so that MVA was, as I said, that data-based framework, and it was used by the city, its elected officials, its appointed officials, its philanthropic participants, and frankly, the bondholders who purchased those $300 million worth of bonds that became NTI, to essentially understand the whys and the wheres of money was being invested. Since then, we have replicated that work in a number of places around the country. This is a listing of them. Our newest, and we're actually just about to get started on it, is Nashville, Tennessee. But I would say probably the smallest place that we've done this work was Selma, Alabama, which is a small town with a population of approximately 20,000. And probably the largest place that we did it, at least population-wise, was the city of Houston, Texas. These are methods really that I think have applicability across a wide array of places, whether or not they're highly dense and urban or varied. I also point out the state of Delaware. We did the entire state of Delaware twice now. And that is a place that has highly urbanized spots like the city of Wilmington, but then you have beach communities, and you have chicken farms, and you have all kinds of other things that really, and suburbanish kinds of areas. So the state of Delaware is sort of like the country in a microcosm in terms of the conditions that it offers. So these methods can work in a variety of places. We do have certain assumptions that underlie the work. Basically, we were doing this initially to guide $300 million, which sounds like an awful lot of money, but in a place the size of the city of Philadelphia, with a demolition at the time costing about $25,000 a clip, and the city generating about 1,000 abandoned properties each year that needed to be demolished, that $300 million could have gone very quickly without any particular evidence except for the receipts, if you were fortunate to get them in Philadelphia. So, the subsidy that we're talking about really should be treated as a scarce commodity that doesn't alone create a market, but essentially brings forth the conditions wherein markets can work. And as philanthropy, I think one way to think about the parallel here is your dollars, and I think Michael and his colleagues at RMHF think this way, which is their dollars they're not always the right dollars to create something, but they're the right dollars to sort of complement or create the conditions where that thing could be created with a variety of other investment vehicles. And so that's really what the MVA is predicated upon. We also have a build from strength mentality. You'll see a depiction of Richmond and the area around it, with strong markets and weak markets. These are not presented as a sign to avoid weak areas and invest in strong areas. And in fact, to the contrary, we have a build from strength mentality. And that is, no matter where you are, particularly in distressed markets, identify nodes of strength and invest into them. And I think that the activities of our MHF have both sort of worked with that, but as well as fostered it, right? In other words, in a community, a strength could be a very strong community-based organization. It could be a confluence of public transportation. It could be an important institution of place. All of those are the kinds of things that like RMHF has invested in over the years, and in some sense, creating the conditions for investing in strength, even in weak areas, in community organizing things that they invest in. And so those building from strength things are very important, because what they represented was a radical shift of mentality, which was find the epicenter of everything that is a problem and try and subsidize your way out of it. Our notion was there was not a historic precedent for that really working. And so the build from strength, even in distressed communities, has to be the logic. We also believe that these things are done for an entire area, because if you are a city, or if you are a philanthropy, or if you are a state or federal government, really everybody is sort of your customers in one way or another. And if you believe in this last principle of making good, sound database decisions, you need to have the same good, sound data across the entirety of the community. And thus, that's why we do this in an entire place. Kinds of indicators that we used, very small type, and I apologize for that, but we use very sort of traditional market indicators, home sales. We look at permitting activity. We look at demolition activity. We looked at addresses that are vacant. We look at bank sales. We look at density. We look at owner occupancy. We also look at the extent to which the rental stock in a community is publicly subsidized. And I would say that virtually every single one of these, over the course of time, it's gotten better. Virtually every single one of these is readily available to you, whether or not you're in a place like the city of Richmond, or some other part of the Commonwealth of Virginia, where, through your local government or, some other open data kind of thing at a university, you will find these data elements, pretty readily. The way we do this is we get all those data, very fine geography, we geocode them, which means we put them very precisely in space. We physically inspect a lot of that data. And then we work at what's known as a census block group geography. It's about a fifth or a sixth the size of a census tract. And we use that geography because if you sort of think about Richmond, if you know Richmond area, if you were to think about walking, taking a 10 or 12 block walk down Broad Street, one of the main streets through the city, you would identify 4 or 5 different conditions. Block groups pick those conditions up. Census tracts kind of work to the average of all those conditions and don't actually represent anything all that well. And so we do work at that census block group geography. We validate those data. We subject them to a statistical cluster analysis, which sorts out the block groups along all those dimensions that I mentioned into categories, wherein the block groups within a category are similar and across the categories they're different. We then reinspect that and lock it down. And that is the MBA process. Of course, that stakeholder and subject matter expert process that Michael mentioned becomes critical at critical stages in the analysis, because that's sort of how we ensure that that validation is really going well, in addition to our field validation. These markets, this is what we found for that Richmond area. We sort of label them A through I. We do array them by price. But you will notice that, not everything else arrays kind of the same way. So for example, if you look at A and B, those are 2 very strong markets within the Richmond area, but one is very much an owner-occupied market and one is very much a renter-occupied market. And we see that actually throughout the Richmond area. So that's just the generalized characteristics. We sort of think generally about the A's and the B's and the C's as the strongest markets in Richmond. The D's and the E's and the F's is sort of the middle markets of the city of the Richmond area, excuse me. And the GH and I is the sort of the stressed market areas. And this is what it looks like. You will notice that the majority, but not all of the, A and B markets are sort of in the, outer, well, particularly the A markets are at the outer fringe of the area. But you do see some A markets and B markets in the city of Richmond. Actually, you see some more B markets in the city of Richmond because you have some very strong markets that are like the A's, except for renter occupied in their predominance. But you'll also see some of those stressed markets, not only in the city of Richmond, but also, in some of the adjacent areas in Henrico and Chesterfield counties, and actually sort of going down into the south and off to the east into Henrico County. I'll drill into the city of Richmond now, just so you get a closer look. Interesting, in many places, probably the most extreme example is where, my community, in the sort of the Philadelphia area, we have the city of Camden. It is the poorest, one of the poorest cities in the country. You know that you left the city of Camden, even if you didn't have a map, within 30 feet of crossing the city border. In many parts of this region, you can go, drive for another 5 or 10 minutes and still be in a place that looks very much like the city, but outside in the county. This was a really important revelation, both for the city and the counties, by the way, not only Henrico, but Chesterfield, because I think that it was convenient, particularly a few years ago when we did this the first time and found a similar thing. It was convenient to think that, all the problems are in the city and the suburbs, sort of have it all locked up. It's good. But a lot of the conditions really are very similar in the city and in the surrounding circle counties to the city of Richmond. One thing I would point out, just sort of strategically, when we look at these things, it's really important to identify places and talk about the build from strength. Here we're in the city of Richmond, and you have a D market, a D market, and a G market, right? So you have two middle market areas and a relatively stressed, but not the most stressed markets. The build from strength logic might, for example, take us to look at this area where you have some surrounding strength, but a pocket of market distress. What's going on in there? What can we support philanthropically, governmentally, programmatically, legally, whatever? What is it that's causing this distress, so that we can, in some sense, allow the stronger market conditions in the adjacent areas to sort of, lift up that area that has distress? And conversely, are there things inside of that stressed area that perhaps could bleed out and challenge these pretty stable middle market areas? And, every community needs their middle market areas, quite frankly. They generally house the largest number of people. They tend to be the most integrated places in communities, and they certainly are in the city of Richmond. So how do we ensure that these things that we really cherish, that they don't go away because there is something eating away and causing distress in some of these other markets? So that build from strength is sort of, you can look at adjacent markets as potentials for strength. So with that, what I'd like to do is stop. There are a couple issue areas. Before I get into them, I think that Susan and Carol had some ideas about, or Caroline, excuse me, had some ideas about perhaps inviting in some questions or discussion before we get into that too much. So let me stop here and invite that in. I'm probably not do it right, but I don't want to waste your time. So let me just show you a couple of the, you asked the question about redlining. What we did here is we took each of the markets and generalized them into 4 categories. And so if you look at that leftmost table, it's looking at, essentially the probability that somebody gets rejected for a loan. In the purple markets, about 4% of the folks there are getting rejected for loans. If you look at the orange markets, you're really looking at, more than double the rate, 9.5, 10%. But maybe even more importantly at this moment, it'll take us into the next issue areas. If you look at all the way to the right, that table where we have the yellow box around some numbers, that is showing you the percentage of sales that are accompanied by a mortgage. So in other words, are people buying these cash, or are they buying them the normal way that all of us likely do, which is you buy a house, you get a mortgage for 80, 90, 95% of the value. In the strongest markets, it's about 3/4 that way. In the most distressed markets, only 44% of the home sales have mortgages. So what you're looking at is, and I don't know if it's necessarily consistent with the gentrification scenario as much as home buyers being squeezed out. But in those stressed markets, you don't have low-income people buying properties with cash. These are outside investors who are buying those properties with cash. And, to sort of drive home the point just a little bit more, we categorize each of the sales over the last couple of years by sales of owners to owners, owners to investors, investors to owners, and investors to investors. And if you look at the strongest markets, those A and B markets, well, over 80% of those are sort of the traditional kind of sale, like you or, I sell my house to Michael. But when you get into those stressed markets, it's down more like 50%. But what are those dominant sales in those markets? Look at that, 33% are going from owners to investors, right? Not a lot necessarily are going investors to owners. In other words, sort of fixed up and put back in owners' hands. Where you see that is in the sort of the FG and H markets, in higher numbers, and in some of the stronger markets as well. So in essence, what we're seeing is that these market conditions are creating different sets of forces that are bringing different kinds of buyers to the table, and perhaps crowding out people or pushing out people, consistent with the gentrification scenario, or outside of gentrification with an investment scenario that is not necessarily favorable to homeowners.
We can take a chance just to say thank you so much to Michael and Ira for joining us today. It's incredibly rich information, and I'm grateful for our participants and your questions and your engagement and your willingness to listen. Thank you. I hope you found it valuable as well.